All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to do a quick test to make sure audio is going through. Welcome to the May 15th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We're going to let some people get logged in. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field in the chat area. If you're watching this afterwards, you may want to just skip ahead 8 to 10 minutes while people get logged in. So we'll go ahead and get started. Sounds like audio is coming through. I'll mute my feed. So my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I'm a specialist in the U.S. for Steinberg products. And today we'll be doing our Q&A. Many people have been on it before, but for those that haven't, we've had people that have sent questions in advance, and you could do that by emailing me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. It gets forwarded to my email, and for some reason, it doesn't include the sender's email address. So if there's something you'd like a response to, if you could include your email, that's always helpful. But we'll have kind of a live Q&A session today. We'll try to go about 3 hours. We'll see how time goes. And if you want to leave your questions in a comment field, that's always helpful. And then we'll try to go through the questions as they come in chronologically. There's no need to ask your question multiple times in the feed. It just kind of tends to clog up feeds. We've had some hangouts where people have asked the same question 30 or 40 times. So if you could avoid doing that, that would be kind of the benefit of everyone and makes it easier for me to kind of go through different topics. So that's how kind of the hangout will work. We'll get some people logged in and we'll go ahead and get started. And I'll just refresh. And probably like many of you during our current health situation, I have my son is at home, so he's watching a Disney film currently. So we'll have, so I will probably get interrupted at some point. So I'll apologize in advance. I have a construction crew that's constructing a house next to me. I think they're kind of doing siding on the back of the house. Yesterday they were right outside my window, so we may hear some noise from that. And my wife is also working directly above me, so we may hear some noise, and I just wanted to apologize in advance. We'll let some people get logged in. So again, please feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and if you have questions that you want to ask, enter them in the comments field. I see some questions already have come in. We'll get started here in just a bit. Hope that everyone has been staying safe and healthy during the pandemic here. All right. All right, so we have Youngstown, Ohio checking in. It's good. UK, we usually have a pretty strong UK contingent. Okay, on the Hangouts. Okay, so some more questions. All right, so we have Norway. All right, so we have Nashville. It looks like Fett from Azalea Music. Good to see you, Fett. All right, so we have Millard Brown. Has been kind of very loyal, checking out the Hangouts this year. All right, so we have New Haven, Connecticut. All right, Norway. All right, so we have Sweden, Manchester. Okay, Turkey. Okay, so we have Atlanta. So Robert, good to see you on the Hangout. So I just see a question before we get started. It says, what software do you use to bring the ASIO audio into your stream? We've discussed it on a number of Hangouts, but basically my technique has always been to take a microphone and my audio interface output into, I have a Yamaha mixer. I think it's an MW12CX I've had for a number of years, which has a USB output. So I kind of separate my settings. So I have kind of a separate audio interface just for the streams in the form of a USB-based mixer, and I found that works really well, and I don't have to load in plugins to various projects and try to make everything fit into one project and constantly load up like a plugin. All right, so we have Mauritius. I probably pronounced that wrong. We're Rhode Island, North Carolina, Finland. We see Taylor from Pine Grove and our loyal attendee. All right, so we have KSA. I believe that's Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Excuse my American ignorance if I got that incorrect. Okay. All right, we'll just go through different. All right, so we have Sweden, Mexico, all right, so Los Angeles, South India, Buenos Aires. My son, you may hear him laughing in the background, so I think he's watching Home Alone 3. People are always interested in what movie he is watching. So I just see a comment: if I multiplied my consulting rate times 3 hours times 300 from forum attendees, could you buy a nice new minivan for the family? It proceeds twice a week. I could probably do okay if I, chose to monetize, but I just want to make sure you guys have free tutorials and help with stuff. So, but thanks for the thought. I wouldn't mind. I would probably invest in my son's college fund instead of a minivan. But all right. So we have Switzerland. Okay, so question is the format to ask a question. Yes, it's just going to be basically like a live Q&A. So ask your questions in the chat field. Okay, so we have London, Croatia, Florida, Bradenton, been there many times, Zimbabwe, Portland, Oregon, Las Vegas, Germany, Toledo, Ohio, Switzerland, more people from Toronto, Russia, Kuala Lumpur, okay, so let's check the time. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So once again, if you have questions, just kind of logged in, feel free to introduce yourself and leave questions in the comments field. And again, they could be sent in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So we have a question. Hi, Greg. I inserted some nice piano MIDI loops from the media bay onto a track in my project. How do I get the chord track to control the notes played? So let's come over here. I'll just, before I forget, I'll save this project. Okay, so let's say I just have a quick MIDI part here with some chords. And I wanted this to follow chords that I inserted into the chord track. So what I could do is just come over here and I'll insert some chords. So let's do kind of, and say I'll just do a quick. So now if I have my chord track here, this will just kind of play this, the MIDI notes will play kind of the same part. And let's say I'll just throw in one more chord for fun here. Okay, so, but if I wanted this MIDI part to change, where it's only going to see the MIDI data that, you know, when we look at it, if I wanted to change based on the chord itself, I would select the track, the piano track, and go to the chords tab on the inspector, and we would say follow chord track, and we could just set that to chords. At this point, we can now have the MIDI part actually changed to accommodate, and now as we play. And if I say, okay, let's just go ahead and say, oh, I didn't like that particular key. I wanted to be, you know, up to like the key of E major. So at that point, we could just select the actual track, go to your chords menu, and just tell it we could do chords and scales that will follow within the scale that's determined. And you could also just have scales or root notes if it's for like a bass part. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. Do you know of an EQ matching function where an audio track's EQ profile is analyzed so that you can apply that same curve to another audio track? So I think if we wanted to come here, so we have one of the EQs that's included with Cubase. Does this. It's the curve EQ from Voxengo. So if I wanted to come here, and I think if we put this into mode and choose average, what we could do is we'll come here and I'll just solo like a quick drum loop. Let me make this a little louder. And then I want to say we could use this as our take. And let's say if I did like another, I changed the EQ on this pretty radically in the channel strip. So at this point, we let it do its frequency spectrum. So we would see kind of different results here. And we say take. And then we could say, I want to do this as a reference and apply it to that one. And then you could just have your kind of matching EQ. So if you're looking to do kind of matching EQ, check out the Voxengo curve EQ. And again, that's included directly with Cubase. So let me go ahead and undo some of my horrible EQ moves. So play around with that, Ted, and I think that will do the trick. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. When I render in place with channel settings, which is the second option in render settings, I lose my gain staging. It saves my pan settings, but not volume. So how can I get it? So let's go ahead and take a quick look. We'll take the same drum loop here. So let's say I have my volume, and I'll just drop it on my fader. And I will select that event. Let's go to my render in place. I will go to render in place. And we can go to a render with current. I'll just choose render settings. And at this point, I'll choose my channel settings. I will. And I'll just do that as one event. And, you know, I'll mute the original source track. So I'll just render. and we could see it should go directly underneath here. And if we look at the amplitude here, this, while the gain is set there, we see the gain that's applied, and we could hear it directly here versus, so we have this track that's muted. So if I mute this channel, so you can see that the gain is kind of automatically adjusted to take care of that. So it may not carry over the mixer settings, but that gain is applied directly into the file amplitude there. So maybe while it's not doing that exactly, so if you're expecting it to just have the volume in the new track to be matched, the volume change would just be applied in the amplitude of the file itself. So see if that makes sense for you, Max. All right. Okay, question. Is there a way to select the top or bottom notes of a polyphonic MIDI part in a key editor? So let's take a quick look. I think I may have something that would work for this. So let's say I have some block chords here. So let's just say, I'll just move this one down by default. So let's say, okay, I'll delete this note. Okay, so I think there's a logical editor function. So if we go to, if I wanted to select the bottom or top notes, we could kind of come here, and if it's kind of laid out like in block chords, we could go to the logical editor. I think what we want to do is to select, and we'll say MIDI notes, and we will choose context variable, and we'll choose equal. And you could say I wanted to do the highest pitch overall, or we could excuse me, just do position within a chord, or note number within a chord. So if we do, like, we have 4 note chords here. So if I have 0, that would select the lowest notes in a chord. If I choose 1, that would select the second highest notes in the chord. So if I come here and apply, that would do the second highest note. So you could hit 3. And if you want to do the highest notes within the block chords, you could just say 4 and apply. And then that way, just the highest notes in the chord can automatically be selected. So you could just kind of choose these variables here. So if you wanted to go to your MIDI logical editor, type is equal to note, you could do select here, and then context variable, condition set to equal, and then you could say note number within chord, and just say, okay, we want to do the third highest note, and then as we just hit apply, that will select the highest note. And if I wanted it to be 0, just click here and hit apply, and that would select the lowest note within a chord. Okay, so we have a question. How can I do a piano reduction? So if we have, and I'll just do just like a horrible example here. Okay, so if I wanted to kind of take notes together here, so I will just kind of, excuse me, clear my throat. I'm not sick, so just All right, so say if I have MIDI notes here, my 20th century composition. All right, guess my 21st century composition now. So let's say we'll come here into this part. Okay, so if I have these parts, one way that I know people do it is you could copy parts on top of each other. And if you want to keep it the same exact time, just you could hold down as you could hold down Alt to copy, and I think just Control or Command, and that will link. So now I have that will restrain the direction. So if I move it down first while holding down the Alt or Option key and then hit Command or Control, that will constrain the direction. So now I have all four of these parts kind of stacked on top of each other. So at this point, we could just say, grab your glue gun and then hold down the Alt key. And now they'll all be kind of merged directly on one part. You could also now just kind of do the opposite, select different voices, copy, and then if I wanted to, we'll add another instrument track here. So if you want to do kind of the opposite, come here and then just do, I think you could just do under functions, like a paste at origin, and that would automatically allow you to kind of paste it at the same exact time. All right. Okay, just reading through questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so it says, say you got a melody, but you want to stack them with a third, a second, or an octave at the press of a button. Is there a handy key to do that? For example, we just want to make a melody line into octaves. So let's say if I'm here, you could have a logical editor preset for this. I could select the events. Let's go to logical editor. And let's get to my MIDI menu to logical editor. And what I want to do is we'll select, I think we want to choose insert. And we could say type is equal to notes. And what we want to do to those notes is we're going to insert value 1, which is the pitch. And we're going to add a value of 12. So now if I did everything correctly, we'll see these MIDI notes automatically get copied exactly an octave up. And you could choose different presets for different intervals. So a perfect fifth, a perfect fourth, a minor, major third, whatever you want it to do. So again, we will just select, get an insert under functions. We're going to say, type is equal to MIDI notes. And we want to add a value of 12. We want to increase the pitch by 12, and then that will automatically copy and double it up an octave. Okay. Okay, so question, I have problems in the chord pad to select chords with sevenths. For example, A minor seventh does not give me the option. Is it blocked? Is that due to voicing? So I've never had this come up as an issue, but if I wanted to just double click, on chords, or just look at the chord pad here, So I have a blank chord pad. I will just say I want a D seventh, with an A and a bass, and so, or if I wanted that to be, a D7/9 chord, with an F sharp in the bass, I could do that, but let's just see if maybe, if a voicing option could affect that. But I've never had any issues with that. And I just have kind of for, just see if there's anything else that could cause that. Chord voicing styles, you may want to just to make sure that, you have all, in my chord voicing styles, I have all options available. And then if you wanted to do custom, maybe if you have that set to custom, and maybe if you only have the style set to triads, perhaps that's what could limit your use of sevenths or more complex chord voicings. But generally, just if you choose all options there in the chord pads, I haven't had any issues getting very complex chord voicing. So try that again. If you just click on the edit and then chord voicing style, make sure you don't have a custom, or try setting it to all options and see if that if that helps you out. Okay, question. How can you choose different tensions in a chord without being locked? So if we just kind of come here to particular chords, I think if we just select thought it was just by kind of going here. Let me just try a new chord pad. Just try a new project here quickly. And I'll just turn off adaptive voicing, see if that makes a difference. All right, let me just try. Quick piano sound here. So just by clicking there in the bottom, and you can do different chord inversions here. So you could experiment. So, see if that helps for you. And it could be tied into maybe if you only have simple triads selected as your chord voicing type, that could limit your tensions. Okay, so a question, how to use circle of fifths and chords to create epic music. Thanks, and hope you're doing well and staying healthy. My family's doing great. We're being very boring and staying in, working, and not going out. So let's try just a quick chord track here. So if you're not familiar with with a lot of like music theory concepts, it's really helpful to kind of come over here, and when you start kind of a chord track that we could, and I'll just that we could choose like a chord here, and then we have the chord assistant. And as we kind of cycle through here, and what the chord assistant is going to allow you to do is to actually, just come up, and we see there's two different options that you can have. You could have proximity, which will be based on what chords are close. Sorry for my annoying mic stand sound. What chords are close harmonically to that, but you also have the circle of fifths. So we could say, okay, I want it to be, my root chord is going to be a D major, and now you could actually just kind of circle, do the circle of fifths. So you could say the next chord I want should be an A, and then when we come here, I want it to be an E chord. And we know that these chords are kind of related in how they actually, work with different functions. So we know that as we transition from an A to an E chord, that there will be common chord tones to do that. And that's why the circle of fifths is a very kind of common pattern with that. So I will just go ahead and let's say we'll have our scale set to. So let's say if I wanted to set that to. All right. So and at this point we could just, and let me just set one quick preference. So I think if we go to editing MIDI, anyway, I won't search for it, but at this point, these chords are kind of, why we have this circle of fifths. It allows you to kind of go around the harmonic spectrum. So if you wanted to kind of use all the different chord tones, that's, really helpful for that. So we could kind of see what chords are musically related, and it allows you to kind of go through chords in ways that kind of make harmonic sense for melodies as well. I'm not sure how to quite make it epic, but you can see a lot of things that it's a very common, the reason that you have G, D, and or like a C, G, and D chords in so many songs is because those are very common chord tones. And especially for guitar-based music, the three first chords that most people will learn. And if you look at a lot of jazz compositions, you'll see that there's often a circle of fifths going around for a while, and then they kind of do like a little chord transition, like a turnaround, it's often called, and the turnaround will get you back into the circle of fifths, but it just allows you to kind of have kind of harmonic consistency, so you're not going from an A to an E flat chord where there's no common chord tone. So that could be harder for the listener to follow, and it's maybe not necessarily harder for the listener to follow, but it hasn't been used for a long time, so it sounds a bit unordinary. So that's kind of the intention of the circle of fifths. So you could, when you're stuck on a particular chord progression, it's a great tool to have access to. Okay, so we'll move on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so we see a question. Greetings, Greg. I wonder, how do I multi-track quantize for more than one audio track? Example, grouped overheads. Is it possible to group edit in the sample editor? Regards. So if you do a lot of different processing, you could do, a lot of times you could put it into like group editing within the folder. So if let me just open up like a drum example here. So once you have a folder enabled, so let's say I have all these tracks in the folder, and what you could do is just kind of enable, you'll see this little option once the tracks are in a folder that would allow for group editing. So now, as you would do like quantizing on one, it could do it on all of the different tracks, and it'll keep the edits applied to that particular folder. So if you want to do that to your overheads, you could actually just put your overheads in their own folder if you have 2 mono tracks. So just right click, move selected tracks to new folder. And then as you do, editing on one of these, it'll be applied, to the other. So if I just kind of come here, if I move something, we could see that will automatically kind of take care of both tracks for you. So if you're doing a lot of like quantizing of multi-track drums, just put them into a folder and do the group editing there. I know some people will just take it into, like 2 overhead drum tracks and select them. Like we have our 2 overhead tracks here. And then if you go to your project, you could also just do a convert tracks. So you can say mono to multi-track, and you can say, I just want this to be routed out to a stereo track. And then, you could just do that as well. That's another option for working with overheads. Okay, so let's move on. Thanks again for wonderful questions. Okay. Okay, so you have a question. Hi, Greg. May sound like a daft question to most. However, I'm most confused when it comes to tracking. What is the best global meter? So, I sometimes will switch meters at different stages in a project. So if I'm tracking drums, let's say for instance, and you could change your meter position by right clicking and going to your global meter settings, and you could choose different sources. So as I'm tracking, a lot of times I may want to see the input meters. But when I'm mixing, and sometimes I know people want to see the input meters when they're building a mix, but when they start to get into the dynamics level, that's when they'll switch the meter position to be, post panner, so that they could see kind of what's going on with the different metering options. So, but it's really entirely up to you, and if you have input channels, like as you're tracking, I will often go to my audio connections and say I have a number of input channels here, and I will choose to unfilter these. I would want to see like my input meters, like on my actual input channels to make sure it's not clipping, because you could actually attenuate and bring down gain from your input channels during tracking, especially. Like I've had to do that a lot I've been involved with like several festival recordings and stuff like that where I don't have control. I'm just getting I remember one I did for the Eric Clapton's Crossroads Festival. I had 48 tracks coming at me, but I didn't have any control over gain, and everyone would kind of creep up. So like between songs, I would just kind of I would look at the input meters to make sure I wasn't clipping, or the console wasn't, feeding weird signals to me. And then I would just put them into like a quick link, and between a song, maybe just bring it down a little bit. So you could attenuate your meters here. So in tracking, I may err on the side of input meters. And then during towards the latter, after I have initial level set, then I may switch to post panner before I start getting into dynamics processing and compressors and stuff like that. So it's a great question. It's not a daft question at all. Okay. Okay, so we have, hi Greg, using the transpose feature at the top, does that work on the whole track selected, or can it be just a selection of a track, i.e. two parts within track one transposed E to other to A? So if you wanted to just, let's say if I wanted to take just the bass here, and I selected, we could do a transpose here. So if I want to say, and just change the pitch here. So this transpose function goes to whatever is selected. So if I wanted to select the entire event, it's not necessarily track based, but I don't think it's track. So if I just have the track selected, it's not an option. When I select an event, it'll become an option. So, but if I say I want this transposed up to, and I want this to go down to 0 here, and then maybe we'll go 1 there. So now we'll be at our kind of root key. When we get to this part, it's just going to go transpose up 2 semitones. Then when it gets to the end of this part, this is set to 0. It'll go back to the original pitch. And then it'll go up 1 semitone here. So you could select your bass and guitars to transpose, but not your drums, stuff like that. So it's going to be kind of based upon the selection, and you could just kind of create a new part and change the selection independently within the track itself. Okay. Thanks for all wonderful questions. Let's just go scrolling through the timeline. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. What is the benefit of setting up a project workspace? So workspaces will allow you to, sometimes I'm currently on my work computer that I'm using for the Hangouts. I have one screen. My studio computer, I use 2 screens. So, I may want to set up different workspaces. And this will just be the ability to say, okay, these are kind of preset configurations. So I could say I want to I want to see my mix console laid out for me. I want to see different racks that are visible. So now I could save this as a workspace. So I will just come here and I'll just say, and we have global workspaces and project workspaces. So I'll just save this in a project and I'll just say mix view. And you could, have these recalled via keyboard shortcuts. So let's say now I just wanted to have, my control room view laid out. So I want to see control room and metering side by side. So I could access my control room here. And if I needed to see both of those simultaneously on the right-hand side, I could just come over here and again add my workspace. So we'll say, we'll add our workspace here and say, so now I could just come right over here, say, I wanted to go to my main view. I wanted to go to my mixer view. I wanted to go to my, control room view. So this way I don't have to, open up window after window to kind of get things organized how I would expect. I could just kind of have those pre-done configuration views automatically configured without having to, close and open and shuffle windows around. So that's the benefit of workspaces. Okay. Okay, so it says, Greg, hi, I have no sound coming out of Cubase Pro 10.5. Updated my audio drivers, was working before. Any ideas? Thanks. Sometimes if you switch the audio interface drivers, make sure that when you go to your audio connections that, you may have the connection here, but maybe not defined. So, make sure that it's, and I've seen sometimes people will start Cubase and their audio interface won't be turned on or connected to the computer. So, make sure, a really simple thing that trips people up a lot that they don't think to actually look at is just going to, under your studio setup and making sure that under your VST audio system that is still working. And if you see that, then that would, kind of give you an indication that, the driver is functioning. If you see it in your studio setup and the VST audio system, if you see that, then, that the driver's working. Sometimes people will, if you're using the control room, I've seen a lot of people get tripped up on having the talkback mic enabled. So when they play that, it's muted as a talkback is enabled or the control room volume isn't down. One quick way of testing stuff is just to, without even having an audio file, is just, hit play and turn the click track on by hitting C. And, see if the output is actually sounding from the metronome. And that will give you an idea if it's communicating or if it's a routing issue. So those are some things to check out. But it's, I think you'll probably find a solution in there. And you could always check within the operating system to see if that audio interface is outputting drivers is outputting audio as well. So if it's not being seen by the operating system or the ASIO driver, then it could be indicative that, maybe there's something wrong with the audio interface. Okay, going through questions. Okay, so we see question, I can't get a strong signal from my microphone into Cubase Elements 10. So generally that's going to be, depending on how your audio interface is configured. If it's, you have to make sure your audio, and it's hard to see, what some things that you could check out, and I don't have all the information, is if you have a condenser microphone, make sure that you have phantom power enabled. Your audio interface may have a pad switch on it. Make sure that is not engaged, because that will kind of, scale down or diminish the input from the particular microphone source. So that would be something to check. So generally Cubase is going to accept the level coming in from your audio interface with Cubase Elements 10. So it's probably going to be outside. Now, if you have a USB microphone, you may just have to go into the control panel. So let's say if I come here, and if you go to, see if I can do this without messing up, you could say, like on this particular, like this is a webcam that, you may be able to attenuate or drop the volume here, depending on the driver for the interface, and sometimes that will control the volume of how the computer is seeing it. But those things, and make sure that you're connecting it into a microphone preamp on your interface. So those are some things I would check. So if you could give some more information, we might, what type of mic, what your interface is, that could be helpful as well. Okay. So, all right. So we have a question. Greetings from Buenos Aires. How can I match the volume of different tracks with wavelab Elements 10? So let's go ahead and get wavelab up here real quick. And I think it's the same. I'm not sure if I have the Elements version, but I think I could. I do. So let's go ahead and open this up real quick. Okay, so one of the things, let's say if we have our tracks loaded into our audio montage, and let's say they're all slightly different levels here that are, as we could see visually, inconsistent. And you could, so one of the things, let's come over here. I think it's going to be, let's see if I can find it in the Elements version. I haven't run this in a long time. Sorry. But I know in a full one that there's going to be a render, or basically an offline process for. Let me just see if I. Oh, so just come right over here to the meta normalizer. And this will give you some great options. So you can say I want to match the loudest clip, or let's say I just wanted to match the volume of this clip. Then I could say we want to match the loudness of the active clip. So this would be like within the montage. Come over here to the edit and go to meta normalizer, and now just hit apply, and that will kind of match the loudness of this clip to all the tracks, or the loudest track or the quietest track. So again, just once you have all the tracks laid out, like for a CD in the meta normalizer, just go like in the montage view, and you could just do this directly there to have that automatically work for you. So that's a great solution for kind of making sure like your CD makes sense audibly, and track 7 isn't 2 dB louder than the previous track, which is softer than the 2 tracks prior to that. Okay. Okay, so it says using the loudness meter on right side, does a LUF setting align with exporting of a project? So when it's not going to necessarily, when we do the export audio mix down here. So as we play back, and I wanted to look at this in my loudness units. So this will pretty much match, so depending on, so if I dropped this level here, we see the correlation there. Now there could be other factors, like if we're doing external processing, that may make this gain different than if you're doing that. And if you notice that if you're going for a specific loudness unit meter, like for delivery formats, one of the things you could do with 10.5, they introduced in audio processes, where we could choose to do your normalize, and previous versions it would only do dB, but now we could say automatically normalize the, and you could do this on the mix down file. So do a mix down, export that, and then you can say normalize it to -23 loudness units, which is good for broadcast, or -14, which could be good for like a streaming service. So, but that will give you an idea of what's going on with your mix with loudness units. But if you need to tweak it, just do your final mix here, and then you could do the loudness normalizing by loudness units, or you could do it in wavelabs, very similar situation. Okay, so let's go on. Thanks for all wonderful questions. Okay. Okay, we have a question. Hi, after updating to 10.5, my key command for tempo change stopped working. Any idea why? You could just make sure, like, if you go to your key commands here, make sure. You could look for the function and see if the if it's changed. It might be under transport. Let me just check. So, and here you could just see if what the actual key command is that you saved. Sometimes, if you run previous versions in administrator versus non-administrator modes, I know what some people have done is just go to your key commands in the previous version and save it as a preset, or go to your profile manager under the edit menu. And then you could save a profile, and then all your key commands should work. So if you don't, you could just check within the key commands. But if sometimes, I've seen people that run one version in administrator mode and the other not, and then it may not carry over all the different settings because it could be tied into your administrator account. But you could easily kind of reset it. Okay, so it says I have elements 10.5 and the dresser, I'm assuming maybe de-esser, but can't apply it in my channel strip chain from Toledo, Ohio. So let me see. I think I have Cubase elements. So take a look at what's in the channel strip here. So it looks like the elements version may not have, all of the different options that you have. So the de-esser may not show up there. It doesn't look like it. And we don't have some of the limiters. Let me just take a quick look and see if it's included in the dynamics here. So that might be one of the plugins that only comes in the higher versions. So sorry about that. All right. I would think that might be in the lighter versions. So I'll mention that as well. Okay. What is the purpose of the 3 mix consoles under the studio menu? So we give you 3 mix consoles because you could have different views of different channels. So if I wanted to come here to this mix console, here I could see all of my inputs and all of my tracks, and I could just scroll along. But I may want to have just a mixer that's just input channels. And I may want to have a mixer view that when I come over here, we'll go to our studio menu. Let's say I go to Mix Console 2. So that will be, I could choose, I'll have this be only input channels. And let's say if I wanted another mixer view to be like all of my VST instruments and group channels, so you could kind of filter different channel types here. I know some people that will have it, if they have a large template, they may have one mixer for their orchestra, one mixer for synths, and one for audio that's dedicated so that they don't have to navigate and scroll around. So, different mixer views will allow you to access different channels quickly without necessarily having to go each time to set up different filter conditions. So that's really the intention of having multiple mixers. Okay, so a question, when comping a track, once done, what is the best way to combine all the parts to make it one audio part? So I think we'll just kind of show you here. Okay, so if I've done different comping on my part here, I could grab just my comp tool. So let's say, I've turned my snap off by hitting J, and this is now, my perfect comp laid out for me here. So if you wanted to turn this into one nice part, all you'd have to do is to select, and if you wanted this as kind of the finished part, and at that point, just go to audio to bounce selection. And then you'd have one nice contiguous part. And if you undo that, then you could still see all of your other parts. So just go to audio and bounce selection, and then you could choose to replace that. Okay. Let's just go on. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so it's hi from Russia. When loading a finished project in MIDI format, Cubase does not determine the tempo. In other DAW, this function is implemented. Maybe you need to enable some settings. So if you're importing a MIDI file, we could come over here, and one of the preferences that you should enable by default, and I'm not sure exactly why it's disabled, but if we go to so we go to MIDI, and under MIDI file, I believe the ignore master track events on merge is checked by default. So uncheck that preference, and then the tempo and signature tracks as part of the MIDI file, if it's included, will be carried over. So just again, preferences, MIDI file on import options, uncheck, ignore master track events on merge. Okay. Question: what is audio pre-record seconds preference? And is there a setting or behavior that can cause audio recording to merge with other events on the same track? I think it happened to me. I don't think so. When we see the audio record in pre-seconds, so we'll go to our studio setup, and we'll see this or I think it's going to be in the preferences. Sorry. Okay, so when we have the audio pre-record, so let's say if I was doing, a punch in on this particular track, and I'm here, and let's say I missed the very first phrase, the very first note from where I punched in. What the audio pre-record will allow you to do is to actually just roll back like a second. I think you could set it up to 1 minute. So if you've actually done a number of, like you just happen to not get the record for the transient, with that setting, you can just come over there and just kind of roll that back by 1 second. And that's kind of what it's for. And I'm seeing, so, and a second part is there a setting or behavior that can cause audio recording to merge with other events on the same track? So it's not going to merge them, but if audio is recorded on top, you'd have separate files, but one audio file that's playing at a time. So maybe if you could specify, Millard, if it's audibly merging or if it's just visually merging. And if you don't want it to visually merge, you can go to the bottom left-hand corner, and then you'll see the audio record modes. So you could choose to replace, you could do cycle history or keep history. So there's some settings there, but it shouldn't audibly merge the two files, kind of like a bounce between two audio recordings on the same on the same track. But let me know what you find. Okay, my son is here, so I'm going to go ahead and reset his movie. Let me pause for a minute. Okay, sorry about that. We should have an hour and 35 minutes for our next interruption. Okay. And I think my timeline just jumped. So let me just find back where I was. Sorry about that. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, I think I'm closed. Okay, so question from Taylor. Is there a trick to getting a consistent level when using tape machine style for punch in, punch out? Playback monitor level is much louder than record monitor level on same track. So it's going to kind of take the same, it's taking the same input as you're doing it. So, one thing that it could be for monitoring, a lot of audio interfaces may have like if, for instance, if you have a UR22, one thing that you may try, Taylor, is to, you have a monitor balance switch between like the incoming monitored signal versus, and a lot of audio interfaces have this like a blend knob between the tracks that we're playing back and the track that you're monitoring, and you could kind of set the balance there. I would try to, maybe if your audio interface has that setting, I think you might have a UR22 from conversations we've had over email. But try adjusting that level, that knob, the balance between the pre-recorded signal, the monitored signal coming back, and what you're recording. And I think that you should be able to balance it out that way. All right, so let's move on. When recording MIDI, should you just auto quantize or play what you feel and then quantize? What really is the difference? What do film composers do when you've worked when you have worked with them? So when we have the auto quantize, and we see this available right here, and what this is going to allow you to do is, I'll just load up let me just load up I think I may have an instrument in here. Let me jump to another project. So I know a lot of people tend not to do auto quantize unless they're doing it kind of intentionally. Where I see people doing auto quantize a lot of times is like, let's say, and let me just so let's say if I wanted to quantize something, I'll set my quantize value to eighth notes. When I see people doing a lot of auto quantizing on purpose, is I'll just do this. And so auto quantizes on input. So let's say if I just want to put in like something like that, but I want it to be eighth notes. So a lot of times in drum programming, so I'll just kind of come here and so now as I play that back, since we did auto quantize to eighth notes, if I did it correctly, it's now just going to play back. And I'll unmute the track. So it just automatically quantized it on input. So when you're doing kind of very intentional, like I just want to get this in fast, I want to, that's when I tend to use auto quantize, and when I've seen people do it. You can always, and one of the cool things that you could do in Cubase is just kind of come over here, and if you go to the quantize panel, I think we could, undo, all of your quantizing. So if I said now, I wanted to, let's just go to I could go to reset quantize, and the original data is still stored. So, but if I wanted to undo that, so, you could auto quantize, but I don't see a lot of film composers necessarily auto quantizing things. Most of them are pretty good players as well. That helps. If you're not a good keyboard player, the auto quantize can make a difference. So that's when I would use it. But a lot of people very intentionally play ahead of the beat or behind the beat. I've worked with Teddy Riley a lot over the years. He's kind of the father of New Jack Swing. And he's, incredibly particular. It's like, this part is slightly ahead, this part is slightly behind the beat. And then, when he's putting it together, it sounds really bad. And then the fifth part comes in and just locks it all together somehow, mysteriously, magically. So, he probably wouldn't do an auto quantize. So, it's really a personal preference. So I haven't seen film composers use it a lot, maybe for, for an effect of something, but their tempos can vary quite a bit as well. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so we have greetings from Serbia. Thanks for thanking me for the tutorials. Okay. So I see a question from Niels. Hi, Greg. Greetings from Denmark. Any progress on the crashing issues with 10.5? I've set my auto save and my timeline just jumped way ahead. Sorry. And I set my auto save way ahead. So if you could, if you want to email me, I'm not having the same functions. But if you could tell us what operating system you're using, and if you want to email a crash report to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, we can maybe check it out and see, but I haven't really had problems with 10.5 on my Mac or PC. But it could be maybe a third-party plugin, and if you get a crash report, that could be helpful for us. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so just saying I need your help to mix my song. If you want to send it over, I could, let me know. So, all right. All right, so I think we have Kyrgyzstan checking in. That's wonderful. South Africa. All right. So question, what is the best format for video playback within Nuendo? I think most people are using, it's not necessarily a format, but you want to make sure that you have, it's the codec and container is really critical for video. So I think most people are using ProRes, like an H.264 is very common. If you just do a Google search for, best video, or there's there is a whole web page dedicated to which format and which containers and which codecs are designed, that work really well, that the video engine was designed for. But it could be like a QuickTime movie, it could be an MP4, and if it's the wrong codec or container, it's not like a WAV file. But you could check that out at the Steinberg website. Let me just see if I could do a quick search for it on my end here. Give me 1 second. So there is kind of if you just do a search for video support in Nuendo, Cubase, Wavelab, and Dorico in Google, and it should come up as the first thing. So it says, hi, Greg, do you know of any two computer setup? So there's a lot of people that use two computers. A lot of composers will do like one computer that's like running often like a VE Pro scenario. So where, and that's hosting virtual instruments. Some people will do that, and some people may use like two copies of Cubase or a copy of Cubase and Nuendo, where one machine is playing back video and capturing print back. It's like almost like a print and catch, uh, like having a print rig. That's a common system. So it really depends what you wanted to work with, how you want it to work with, whether it's kind of farming like samples to a different computer or working, to get more IO together. So, okay. Okay, so it says, question, hello, Greg, has the sync lock and frame rate verification gone away from the transport bar? Cubase 5 told me when it was locked to external sync with the verification. I think that might have disappeared, as a lot of people aren't necessarily syncing to external devices, but I'll just take a look. So say if we go to our external sync here, I apologize for... Yeah, so I think it's going to be not in the transport bar like it was, I think, in Cubase 5, which I think you were running before. So that might have changed. Um, question, is there a way of someone remotely taking control of my mixer and EQ my song in real time from another country? Thanks. I know some people that do TeamViewer, to kind of do that. It could be a little tricky sometimes getting the audio over to make sense, but you could do like some basic screen sharing to do that. I know I've done some quick, probably quick and dirty mixes for people, using headphones for them, using TeamViewer or other screen sharing type of applications. So, all right. Okay. So let's move on. There's a special effect where a high pitching sound is triggered with variable periodicity. Sorry, I'm not able to read today. Starting from a period of beats, then gradually speeding up and slowing down back. How to do that? Okay, starting from a period of beats, then gradually speeding up and slowing back down. So this question from Tibor Kiss. Maybe if you could send an example audibly, like maybe like a download link or something like that, I might be able to figure out what's going on. But it sounds like maybe it's something you could do with a synthesizer. Maybe something like Retrolog might be able to do that, but I just want to make sure I'm not going completely the wrong direction for you. But maybe if there's a sound or something you've heard, and if you could send a download link to a file to clubcubase at steinberg.de, I could probably figure out how to get the sound in Cubase for you. Okay, so we have a question. Any info about my current obsession additional to create harmonies from chord track? What options are there to specify how the harmonies are created? So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so this is one of the cool things that you can do in Cubase is if I have I have a MIDI piano part, which is pretty typical, and what I want to do is go to my project and go to chord track, and we'll say create chord symbols. And generally, I leave the top two checked, and these are kind of my default settings. I find work well, and now it's going to add the chord track for me, kind of at the very top of the project. So as we look at our piano part, and if I wanted to take a look at the chord track on the score, just go open the score editor, Command or Control R, and go to Advanced Layout and say Display, Show Chord Track. So let's say this little phrase here, I'll just take off my snap quickly, and I could select that phrase there. So I will go to, since we know what the chords are there, I go to my audio menu, and we'll say generate harmony voices, and I'll say give me 4 harmonies. I could now just select these. I'll bring them down a little bit, and this will give me musically correct harmonies for that part. And it'll give us, a soprano, alto, tenor, bass. But when I select each one of the tracks, if I wanted to change that particular chord voicing, what we could do is just go to chords, and I could say I wanted this to be a soprano too, like an alternate take. And I wanted to get rid of the bass and turn this into, so this way you could select your 4 different voices. And if we have this set to not follow, the chord track, we could actually just select all of these together, and I'll just hit Command or Control E, and we'll take it into our very audio editor. And as we look at these particular parts, so at this point we could just, do the editing. And so I'll just go take this. We'll just start that there. And now you could just edit your different chords and move, when you select different voices, you could move those around, and you could colorize all of them based upon the chord track, so that that green notes are within the chord, blue notes within the scale. So if you wanted to just, adjust the actual chords just like that, it's a very easy way of doing that. So, play around with select the track and go into the chords, and then you could switch the voices here or freely move them around. Okay, so I'm just seeing a question. I'm not sure if I understand it. It says, tell me more about adding space to distortion rhythms. So if we jump back to another project here, so let's say this has some distortion in it. So, if you wanted to add space, I'm not sure if I understand a question, but, you could let me just see. I could probably even, if you have, if you wanted to come here and let's say if we go to like our warping, so I will just come here. Let's say if we go to our audio warp and we zoom in, we could do free warping on our different parts. So I could say, I want to keep that there, but move this and, move this particular part here. And then we could add more space that way. But I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. So if you get a chance, just with some more details, if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, that'd be helpful. So you could try that, or we may be able to catch it towards the end of the Hangout if you leave a comment in the field. Okay, so we have just a silly question, Greg, please. Is this possible to colorize the fader knobs? So let's come over here to the mix console so we can see our fader knobs. So like the fader caps, I guess, is what we'd look at. So if we wanted to come here, we go to the preferences. So let's say if we want to go to the mix console, so you could have, different channel strip colors, you could have different fader colors. So let's say if I wanted audio tracks, so let's see so we could colorize that. So, we have our defaults. So that way you could have different types of tracks. And if you wanted to see kind of the whole, mixer faders colored. So let's say if I wanted to come here and I'll just change my views. And if I wanted these to be colorized throughout the mixer, I could go to preferences. And then if we go to track and mix console, I could just say, let's make our mix console faders. And then I could just hit apply here and we could change those. So those are some different options that you could do for, changing the, mixed console colors and faders and stuff. Okay. So we see question, how do you assign a parameter to a CC when there is no MIDI learn? Hi from Belgium. So there's a couple different ways. One is just using a generic remote. So if you, an easy way is just to set it up for, if it's like a quick control, you could set up, there's track quick controls and we could set up different parameters to, so let's say if I want my Nectar controller here and I could just click on learn. All right. So I'm just going to learn this particular quick control. Then when I go to any of my quick control parameters here, so I could say, let's say on this track, I'll just put an insert. So let's say if I want to put on like the VST bass amp. Okay, so now I go to my quick controls. I could say parameter 1, and I could say let's get an insert VST bass amp, and I wanted to switch the amp setting. So let's say I wanted this to control gain. So that's an easy way of doing it, just like that. And you could do that and you could save different parameters so that you have kind of 8 sliders on your controller, which is pretty typical, that you could then just have those sliders automatically control the parameter there. You could also go into your studio setup. And if you wanted to get really extensive, you could have a generic remote and say, on, we could say on this particular track, and you could go in here and assign different so say we would go to our VST mixer and I wanted this on my bass track and I wanted to be the insert for my VST bass amp, and I wanted it to be, gain, and then you could do a MIDI learn here for different parameters. So there's a couple different ways. Probably the fastest way is just to use quick controls with that. So, and that way you can have 8 things that you don't have to set up all the time, and then you could just change these to whatever parameters you really want. Okay, so a question, high DPI, what is the effect on performance or computer resources? Depending on the resolution that you're running, it will take more computer resources, because you're drawing each pixel. If you're doing a 4K display, you're drawing each pixel 4 times. So a lot of the, video cards can have processing to help with that, but it will take a little bit more computer resources. But a lot of the video cards can kind of compensate for it, so you may not notice a huge performance change as well. Okay. Okay, so thanks for tips from Tim from Mission Viejo. It's a beautiful area. How do you delete an instrument rack track? I can't figure it out in the Cubase manual. So let's say if I added a VST instrument here, I'll just go ahead and add 2. So let's say I'll add 2 copies of Pad Shop. I think there's a couple ways. So just add these. Okay, so one is if you go to your VST instrument rack, you could just click here and say no VST instrument. You could also, remove selected tracks. And if I remove the selected tracks here, then the instruments get deleted as well. So there's kind of 2 different methods you could use for that. Okay, so see a question from Athens, Greece. Dear Mr. Ondo, kindly advise Cubase 10.5 Pro imports MP4, and sometimes it doesn't. Invalid or not supported format. Windows 7. Thank you. Windows 7 is, could have an effect on the different, video capabilities. I know with Windows 7 in Cubase 10.5, it doesn't have the ability with a newer video engine to export. But again, if you go to that website, it's really, you could have an MP4 file, and video files are really different than a WAV file. Like a WAV file, something that plays a WAV file, everything will play that WAV file. But a video file is going to have codecs and containers. So you just, try to do like an H.264 ProRes file, and there's a number of different freeware video converters. And again, check out that page. Let me just see if I could just show it to you here. So I'll just Google this video support for Cubase and Ondo. So, and if you just kind of come here, there's another page as well. So yeah, if you just kind of first thing that kind of shows up here, and this will show you the container and the codecs that are supported for those containers. So use that as just search for video support in Cubase, Wavelab, and Nuendo Dorico, and that should help you with that. Okay. Okay, so see, what's the best way to work with create quantize group preset function in edit advanced quantize? So let's say if we have a particular file. I'll I'll just do an audio file here. Okay, so let's say I kind of like the feel of this particular file. So what I could do is I could open up my quantize panel, and we could do that by going just to the right of the quantize, and then we'll see our quantize panel become visible. What I want to do now is just double click, and I could go to my hit points, and I could adjust kind of my hit points to kind of show the threshold. So let's say I want that. And now what I could do is I could just click on, we'll just say create groove. And then that automatically carries that over directly into, and now we have our groove that's been created. So if I wanted to quantize MIDI parts or audio parts to that, that's all I would have to do is to use that as the basis for the groove, and it just will show up as a preset. Now, if I have a MIDI part, and let's say I had just like, you know, I can now take that MIDI part and drag it into my quantize settings, and that would then be my groove that I could use. So if I wanted to quantize another MIDI part to that, I could just select kind of, you know, and we could just take those different ones there, and that's how you can make kind of groove quantize presets pretty easily. Okay, says, hi, how can I make a time warp with multiple audio files at the same time? Example, one guitar recorded with 3 mics. I don't have an exact file for that. So if you do one of the things that's helpful to know is the ability to do like the audio alignment. So I'll show it with some vocals here, but you could do the same function with guitar as well. So if I come here, we'll just make sure I don't destroy everyone's ears. So if our vocals or guitar parts, like a multi-mic'd guitar, aren't quite sitting as well as we would like, if we go to this little icon here, we could open up the alignment panel. So once you have the editing done on one, you could say that's going to be my source, and I want to take these and have those be my targets. So the first one's a reference, and then just say align audio, and then they'll be kind of aligned up here. So that's how you get, and the same thing will work for drums and guitars as well, dialogue. So okay, so we have it says question how to use VST Connect Pro as it is creating a noise when I open. Okay. So when we come here to do like a VST Connect Pro session, we want to make sure, so VST Connect allows us to do kind of remote recording. So we'll come here, we could set a talkback microphone input. We will now have this so you can see me kind of on a webcam here. So I have bad lighting in my studio. I would log in. See if I remember my password. All right, and now at this time I could just find my friends. I could invite them to record with me. And as we do this, it's going to, one, automatically create a track for the performer to record on, but it's also going to make and we would be able to see that person, on, if they had a webcam, we'd be able to see them on video. We could have our talkback mic communicate with them. But it's also going to make a VST connection. So when we go to your studio menu, because how we need to get the audio to them is through just like a Q mix. So at this point, you go to your audio connections, and this would make a Q here. So you want to make sure that perhaps that this Q mix is maybe going, route it to a different output, and that could be causing some noise. So, but then once you track the audio through the Q mix, you just literally hit record, and just hit the record button here, and you could probably disable the monitoring, or you might hear some of the latency, and then it's going to be tracked in. So make sure that, one, it could be noise if you have this routed from the other side, so see if before you even arm, if you hear noise, you could be hearing noise from, like sometimes, I've had sessions where it's like, really bad webcam mic that the person has on as their, main microphone because they don't know what they're doing. And it's like, no, you want to set it up for your audio interface. So that could be adding noise. So those are a couple of things to try. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so Greg, how do you use circle of fifths and add chords to create epic music? Okay, so I think we covered that a little bit earlier. Okay. All right, so it says, "Hi Greg, what is the best compression in Cubase 10.5 Pro?" They're all very high quality compressors. But when you're kind of working on particular tracks, they're just different flavors, so it's like, is Coke or Pepsi better? It's really could be incredibly personal choices. So for just a standard, very easy to use compressor, this is a particular, it's not going to be necessarily like really colored sounding, so you could have that if you wanted kind of a vintage compressor, which is highly sought after and reminiscent by some people who've used them, or if you're going for the particular tube compression sound. So they're really different flavors. They all give you, they could all compress your signal with great results, and they're just like subtle variations of flavor or different colors, different aural colors to choose from. So, and it could be like, this bass on this song sounds great with this compressor, and the next song you may use a different one, also depending upon the song as well. Okay, so let's see. Question. Also, how do you create a chord track from a MIDI part? I tried to do it with the bass track, but when I clicked create chords, it created the track, but no chords in it. So it's going to need, if you want to do chords, you probably would want it to be, something that has chords in it. So like a bass line is generally going to be one note, so it's not going to give it enough information for what's going on. But again, like just to do that again, we'll activate this project, and I know this was probably asked before, but just simply select like a piano part or a part with chords, and chord is has 3 or more notes in it, and go to your project menu and go to chord track and just choose create chord symbols, and that'd be all you'd have to do. Okay. All right, saying Grant Nicholas on the Hangout. Good to see you, Grant. Okay. Okay, so I have a question. MIDI editor, what does tool only change automatic from select to pencil and move to edit velocity, but not scissor to pencil? Hold Alt, it doesn't change to pencil. Does not work anymore. So if you have this select tool active and you go to the velocity range, that allows you to automatically switch to the pencil tool. But I think if we go into the editor or if we're here, that we will it'll still kind of maintain the tool and not change. So I did kind of bring this to the attention of some of the planning people. What I often do is just hit 1 as I'm on the QWERTY keyboard, the computer keyboard. So if I'm in another tool, I go here, I just hit 1. So I have my mouse on my right hand and I just hit 1 with my left hand. And that way it'll kind of switch to the tool. So I know I know that when it's the selection tool, it goes down. And when I pointed this out, they didn't realize it was doing that. So so I think we'll see that. But as just like a quick workaround, I just will come here and hit 1, and then I know when it's the object selection tool. I think another technique that people will do is if you're going down there, just tap on the right mouse click, and that's another way it'll automatically go to the selection tool. So if I'm here and I have the glue tool going on, just tap with the right mouse click and then go down, and then it'll switch to the object selection tool. So as soon as you have one tool selected, tap, and then that will automatically just select. That will switch you to the object selection tool as opposed to holding down the Alt key. So you could try that, and I think that would work for you as well. Okay. Okay, so seeing more questions on the chord pad that we already answered. So, okay. All right, good to see Vinny Sabatino in from Orlando. Attends a lot, and I think he's been to the clinics at YRS. Okay, so question. I'm fairly new to Cubase and recording in general. Does anyone here have a suggestion for learning how to use a DAW from the very beginning? I'm open to any suggestions. We do have, if you look at, there are a lot of great, if you go to Cubase, youtube.com/Cubase, there's, lots of great starting off videos. There's plenty of advanced videos, but I know I specifically did a video, for family that were starting to run Cubase, and, where, how to do your first audio recording and stuff like that. So there are a lot of very beginner oriented videos. Just kind of, go through the youtube.com/Cubase, and there's lots of great resources there. Yes, I'm seeing a comment from Vinny. If you've learned a tip or trick today, feel free to like the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel. All right, so let's go on. All right, good to see Robbie Bowling on Hangout. They're a longtime attendee, and see him at Spunky's place at the Audio Dog in Dallas when I do clinics there. Okay. Let's just go through. Okay, just seeing some people giving more suggestions for YouTube videos. I think it's a great way to learn stuff. Okay. Okay, so says, hello, Greg. Can you tell me why I keep getting my channel audio muted as I edit more than one LFO control under MIDI inserts sometimes? I don't know what would cause the, if you're doing, if you're setting up stuff from, so say if I go to my MIDI insert here and I have my auto LFO, so it could be, if you're doing stuff through a generic remote through like a MIDI loopback, which is sometimes what you can do for parameters that aren't necessarily, um, where they don't have like a right click to learn CC parameter of. But if you go here, make sure that if you have a generic remote set up, that maybe that same MIDI message isn't set to mute in the VST mixer. That would be one thing that I would look at. But if you wanted to like share a project file with me, I'd be happy to take a look at like some of the routing that you have. But I would see if you're accessing through like a loopback into the generic remote, that's what I would look at as well. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi Greg, is there a way for Cubase 10.5 Pro to let an external controller follow the selected channel on a screen rather than manually switch banks? I think it's really up to the controller. I know, I use a CC 121 controller, and when I use that, I don't run into, the issues of actually working with having, anytime that I select a track in my mix console, that is automatically selected. So some controllers will be set up with that. Some you have to manually bank. And I believe if it's a Mackie control unit, and I could be mistaken, that it needs to advance through banking message. And it's kind of a design intention, or now could be viewed as a limitation of the Mackie protocol, which is, in all fairness, 25-ish years old. So, or 20-ish, 20, 25 years old. So, it could be that. So, but I know like with the Steinberg CC 121 controller and other controllers, that whatever channel selected, that becomes the active controller. So it could really depend upon your controller that you're using. Okay. Okay, so I see question, what's my email? So if you want to email me, you could reach out to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay. Okay, so we have a question, how to apply different colors automatically to new tracks. Okay, it's a great question, so let's come over here. So say a lot of times when people come here and we add like an input channel, we see it no colors. So let's go over here to preferences. And then if we go to preferences, user interface, we can select track and mix console channel colors. And there's an auto track channel color mode. So I'm going to just say use previous track plus one color. So now as I add tracks, I could now just kind of come here. So let's add an audio track. And I'll just keep this dialog open. So that will add the color. So we didn't have a previous track color, so this will be the first color. I add a track, and now the tracks will just automatically be colorized just like that. So come over here to preferences, to user interface, to track and mix console channel colors. And the very top choice, you could just say use last applied, use random track color. So do that, and then the colors should automatically be added to new tracks. Okay. Okay, I see someone's listening to me while they're fixing their Fender Champ amp. So that's good. All right. All right, so Mark Matson's checking in from Chicago. Good. Okay, so question, I guess, using a Panorama P4 like you, yet keys on Panorama don't align always with VST keyboard on screen, in Contact, and Dark Planet, i.e. C3 maybe one key higher on Panorama. Do you know how to correct this? So right above the pitch bend wheel, it's kind of an odd thing. So let's say if I open up just a quick MIDI track, I'll do some Nectar support here. I have a lot of friends that work there. So a lot of guys that used to work at Steinberg are working there. My friends Ralph and Mark. Some other guys, Niels as well. I think he was kind of like a Steinberg specialist in Europe at one point. So let's say if I'm here and I go into my MIDI editor. So sometimes the Nectar can get transposed. So let's say I'm hitting a C note here. If you hit the button right above the pitch and mod wheel, which is like below the transpose, that will do kind of transposition in steps. So just hit those buttons there until they're aligned. So it's right below like the channel or like the octave jumps. So that's how you could do it on a Nectar. So. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So it says, so I work in 88.2, and I noticed that when I try to make a sample instrument or drag samples from the timeline to a sample instrument groove agent, it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and give it a shot here. I will do just change my sample rate here. Okay, and I'll just record for a second. Okay, so let's see if I drop this into a sampler. So it's just a blank audio file, but that looks like it took there. Let's try Groove Agent. I'll do Groove Agent SE since that comes with everything. And I'll just take that sample and drop it right in. So it doesn't look like there's any problems of dropping in 88.2 files into the sampler track or directly. And I'll just make sure that I'll look at the pool window and make sure that that file. Yeah, so the file is 88.2. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be any problems with that here. So maybe I'm not sure what would cause that, but it seems to be working kind of as expected here. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, let's see. In the score editor, when using guitar tablature view, is there a way to constrain a 2 or 3 octave scale melody to one position? The default spreads it 12 or more frets within 4 or 5 frets. Okay, so let's take a look. See if I have a MIDI part that. Just see if I can find a quick MIDI loop. Okay, so take a look at this. I haven't messed around with the tablature in a while, so I may have to see. I may do a horrible job at this. All right, so let's come over here and let's make sure I'm in page mode. All right, and let me just see if there's some. I may have to come back to this. I haven't done tablature in many years, but let me just see if there's. I want to say that there was a default. Let me just. Just take a look, see if anything jumps out at me. If not, I could do some research on it to see and kind of get up to speed on it a little more. But let me just see if there's maybe. Yeah, I will see if I could figure out a way to see. I thought there's a way to change strings. It's just kind of having a brain cramp on that right now. But I'll make a note to look into the guitar tab as well. Okay, so when tracking drums via MIDI electronic kit, is there a way to have it track audio in real time instead of just MIDI notes? Wouldn't care if it didn't record MIDI. Yeah, so I do this a lot with different people. So if you're kind of, let's say, doing a new project, you could say, I want to add an audio track, and we'll make it a drum track. We'll just make it stereo. Come right over here, drum, and then let's add a MIDI track. And you could have that coming directly in. So you just would connect the audio outs, and then you could record, both the MIDI and audio simultaneously. If your drum brain has multiple outputs and your audio interface has multiple inputs, you could record them to separate tracks or just record a stereo out. You could place these into a folder. So if you just wanted to always, take your drums here and just hit one button to record both the MIDI and audio simultaneously, you could do that as well. Okay. So is it possible to have more than one set of chord pads in a project? So I think we got one chord pad, one chord. Let me just, is it possible to have more than one set of chord pads per project? I think it's one set of chord pads. So when you come here, but one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, if you needed more chord pads, and maybe not necessarily two, if you click on the edit, let's come over here. Let me just. I think if we go to the settings here for the chord pad, and you could go to pad layout, we could choose grid, and you could say, I want it, 64 different chord pads. So when I come here, that way you could have 64 different chord pads if you wanted to. So go to your setup and go to pad layout. So you could have it as a keyboard or just a grid. And then we could adjust there as necessary. So let me just. Okay, my son's knocking on the door. Hang on just 1 second. Bear with me. All right, sorry about that. There's apparently a scary part in the Disney film for my son. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Hi, Greg. Thanks for your work. Question: why doesn't the mute unmute object doesn't work when trying to mute MIDI and audio clips when selected with the range selection tool? Okay, so let's go give it a try here. Just drag an audio file in. Okay, so if you select these here, now I think that we haven't actually, so if we go to mute, let me just see if there's a key command for under edit, maybe, but I think we may need to split. So I think what you want to do is just kind of take that and mute, which would make sense. Let me just see if there's a particular key command I'm thinking of. And we might be able to kind of do it with a macro. Just go from the top. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can do this with the macro. So I'll just go to my key commands. And maybe what I want to do is okay, I'll do a new macro, say mute range. All right, so let's see if I add this. And let me just do a split range. just find the name of it, and I think we just want to split. Sorry, just okay. So let's see if we add that. Let's move that up. And I will just try 2 more steps to the macro. I know it should be a little easier. I'll mention that as kind of a workflow thing, but I think we might be able to get this. So let's just say mute range. I won't spend a lot of time. Let's let's go to our transport. All right, I'll try this. So let's say if I have a range selected here. I'll see if I can play around with the macro, but I see probably what you want to do if I'm understanding correctly. But yeah, so I think that would make sense as a added function for range editing. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so just seeing some questions on like 808 glides in the sampler. So I think, let me just see if I can find jump here to samples. Okay, so I'll just right click, we'll create a sampler track from that. And I think that you could just do the glide here. And then, sorry about that. So if you want to do kind of like different, sure why it's acting up. Let me just See if my Mac will wake up here. All right. So, but just try doing the glide function in the sampler. Okay, so let's move on. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing this might be more to the previous question with the drums and being able to record the audio from the sampler. So what you could do if you wanted to record the audio from the instrument as opposed from the drum machine, if you want to record that as audio, so I'll just come over here. I'll just do a new project. And I'll load up an instrument track of Groove Agent. I will come to my audio sends. I'll just right click and I'm going to or I'll just select that particular track in the mix console. And we will say, let's add a group channel to the selected channel. So I'll make it a stereo channel. And then I want to add a stereo audio track. Okay. So right now I will load up a kit inside of Groove Agent. And let's say I wanted to record MIDI and audio simultaneously. So we're going to use the group as kind of a pass-through. So I will just kind of come here. Let's see if this is playing. Let me check just my audio connections here quickly. Sorry about this. Okay, so I'll just try a new project or load up one here quickly. So what you could do is route the Groove Agent channel out. Okay, so let's say if I come here. All right, so I will have kind of an instance of Groove Agent here. So I'll play that via MIDI in real time. So again, I will select that track. Let's add a group channel to the selected track. We're going to make it a stereo group. And you can do this for multiple devices as well. And then I want to add an audio track. So I have my Groove Agent here. Let me just undo that. Hang on just one second. Just want I think it's just routing to an input that doesn't exist in my current setup. So okay, so this routed to group. Sorry for this not going as fast as normal. Just going to start with new project. Sorry. Let me just see if I can get this sorted out. It's usually pretty straightforward. But what you could do, I'm not sure if I was choosing not to cooperate. I just... But what you could do is just simply route this to a group. And I assure you that this works. And then we'll add an audio track. Okay, I'm just going to check my connections here. This might be... Okay, so we'll take this output here, send it to the group via send. Enable that, and then in your audio track, set the input from the group. So that's generally how you do it. So for some reason it's just kind of not working well. But if you take the output of Groove Agent, send that to a group, and send a group to the input of the audio track, that should do it for you. Sorry that took a while. All right, let's move on. Okay, so it says... Hi, Greg. Question. Can't assign one of the faders on a MIDI keyboard to control velocity of the MIDI notes, either during recording or later while editing. I want to make the strings sound more natural. Generally, it's not the velocity that makes strings sound unnatural. What you want it to do is to make sure, that the velocity is actually tied to a particular note message. So let me just open up kind of a string piece here. So, and what you often want to do for kind of more authenticity with string parts is to make it actually, so many string patches don't, if I hit it very hard or soft, don't make a difference. But what can make a difference is like your modulation wheel, and depending on so here I'm going to move just my modulation wheel. And depending on the library, they will respond and be more expressive based on that, as opposed to having it based on the, so if I come here to the library, and I think this is the Halion Symphonic Orchestra, that my legato is set from modulation. So if I wanted to play... that moving the modulation wheel can make a difference. Now, if you absolutely have to do velocity, I think that there might be a preset for in the editor here. So in the input transformer, And let's see if there's a preset. So it could be a left-handed approach because your library may not actually work with this, but you could say, there are like where you could take, let me see if it's even in the logical editor presets. So we'll just kind of come over here where you could kind of take a MIDI CC and convert it to velocity. So let me just see if it's... But a lot of times your velocity is not going to make a huge difference in the actual string expressiveness. So you say insert MIDI volume for velocity. Okay, so this is, we open this up and let's take a look at that. So when I go to my logical editor, so this would basically take your notes and take MIDI controller 7 to the velocity. But again, I think as you do that, so you could have like a fader do MIDI CC7, and then if we have that carried over, so I could, let's say if I see my velocity carried over here, and I add a controller lane for, let's say, main volume. And if this works as expected, so that turned the velocity into volume messages from that. So again, make sure that your string library and what it's doing, it probably won't respond. So check to make sure that you have the right kind of expression control for that. But, MIDI CCs are very different than a velocity that's tied to a particular note. So, even if you do that, velocity is a subset of the MIDI note message. All right, try to move on. Okay, so it says, "Hi, Greg. How do I load sample packs? Order just samples into Cubase library without having to import the audio samples on separate tracks." Okay, so without having to... Okay, so if you have like a sample pack that you've purchased, you could go to your media bay here. So say you just go to your media and go to your file browser and then, look on this computer and you could navigate and see all of your samples just laid out here. Okay, so just make sure I'm understanding the question. Yeah, so, and then it's going to be available anywhere that you do it. And if you have particular samples, a folder that you really like, you can say, okay, I came here and these are kind of like my go-to place. You could just say add favorites. And then when you want to navigate back to that location, you could just say go to favorites. So that's how you could do it. So it just treats it as any audio file. Okay, so see question. I think we covered this in the previous Hangout, but we'll do it again. How can I add Roland U20 in the MIDI device manager? It's not in the list. What file should I look for from the internet? So the U20 is just the keyboard version of the U220. So same patches, same architecture. The U220 is just a rack mount version. So if we come over here to more options and we go to MIDI device manager, we could just say install device and scroll down, add your Roland U220, tell where it's connected to on your MIDI port wise. Then as we add a MIDI track, we could just kind of come over here. We say this is being routed out to my U220. And then where we see off, we could see all of your patch names here. So that's how you could access all your patch names. So again, the U20 is just the keyboard version of the U220. Okay, so when using an analog stereo compressor, is there a way to control the output of each channel when routed as a stereo external effect? Let's take a quick look. So if we have this going in our audio connections and we have it configured as an external effect, so let's say we have this, I'll just add a stereo compressor. Okay, I will add an audio track. So here we could do it as a send gain, and that would probably be to both channels. But I would say if you're running it, if you need it to have different gain for each channel, that you should just run it as two mono external compressors. So, so if you wanted to control the output of each channel, so you're probably not running it in stereo mode. You're probably running it as dual mono, I would assume. So in that case, I would probably specify each channel as its own external effect if you wanted to have different gain structure. Okay. So we have a question. So I work in 88.2. Okay, we had that question already. So I see a question: what happened to the spectral layers hangout? I went to watch it the other day, and I noticed that it wasn't available. So I'm not sure what happened with it. So I'm sure that they'll probably try to get it done. It takes a lot of finagling to make hangouts happen technically. So maybe it was a technical thing. I'm not sure. So. Question, is there a benefit to working with Cubase on Mac as opposed to Windows? It's really just a personal preference. Both Cubase works great on either platform. So it's really a personal preference as to which one you prefer. So. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. Can you explain how Cubase deals with time signatures other than 4/4? I have problems with the 6/8 drum loop. Click and grid do not match the loop. The musical mode is activated. So if we have, let's do a new project. So let's add a signature track. And we'll say we have it as 6/8. And let's say if I wanted to just change my click pattern. So now I have my metronome. Sorry about that. And let me adjust the tempo down here a little bit. And let's go ahead and look for a quick drum pattern. So let's say we wanted to look for loops, and let's say loops, and we'll look for like a MIDI loop. And if you wanted to look for like loops in different time signatures, I think if we come over here and we select musical, we can now see signature. So let's see, I may not have any. And then you'd be able, I may not have any 6/8 drum loops, but I'll just kind of read through the question again. So I have problems with the 6/8 drum loop. Click and grid do not match the loop. The musical mode is activated. So I'm not sure which 6/8 drum loop. Let me just see if there's an audio. So I don't have a 6/8 drum loop currently. But if it's, I'm not sure, sometimes people will take a 4/4 drum loop and drop it in a 6/8 pattern, and then try to do it. But if I come here, let's just say I programmed something quickly. I'll do the worst drum program of all time. So let's just say I come here and okay, so if I have that going on, just make sure this is set correctly. Sorry about that. Let me just, operator error. Okay, let me adjust the movie for my son. Bear with me. Sorry. All right, new movie on. Sorry about that. So let's see if I can get this quick drum pattern sorted out here. All right, so say we're in 6/8. So I'm not sure if you tell me what problems you're having with 6/8, and maybe if it's just a particular loop. So okay, so see a question. If I accidentally copied MIDI parts over the top of one another, is there a way to delete all the layers except for one? Like if there are 5 parts, how do I delete all but bottom layer? So if you have MIDI parts that are kind of stacked on top of each other, let's say something like this. The one thing you do is if you go to the center bottom, you could kind of see all of the different takes there. So you could just switch between the ones. And then I think if we say we want this one, you could choose to remove overlaps, and that will get rid of, once you have the correct one, remove overlaps. And I think that will get rid of the rest of them. Okay. Okay, so it says, at Greg, my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 second generation has the latest drivers, and I'm sure it was me while loading up several contact players and forgetting to set up their audio connections. Okay. All right, so question, does program selector work the same for USB connected devices as it does for MIDI connected synths? Yeah, so if we have, like we were just showing a little bit earlier, whether it's communicating MIDI via USB or 5-pin DIN, the program change will function. So let's say if we want to go back, I think we still have maybe if we had the U220 configured, so that would still work the same way. So I'll just come here to my MIDI device manager again. So let's say that's going there. So we have our U220. And now, whether it's set up by MIDI or USB, it's the same exact functionality. So I see a question, will Cubase ever introduce the ability to use any plugin for mid-side processing like wavelab? I haven't heard of plans for that, but it's, I think it's a reasonable request, and I'll pass it on again. I think it's a great feature in wavelab. Some of the plugins can do it currently, like if we go to frequency. So if I just wanted to come here, one of the plugins that people often don't know that does that function is under the EQ is frequency, but unlike wavelab, here we could choose which of the stereo tracks is mid and side, but I'll pass that on as a feature request. Okay. So just seeing, I'm not getting the 2 number to give my performer. Please go through VST Connect setup. Okay, so it says I'm not getting the 2 number to give to my performer on a VST Connect. So if they don't have a My Steinberg account, what you could do is once you're logged in and you're doing a VST Connect, I think if we come over here, let's say if we do a VST Connect Pro, at this point, once you're logged in, So what you want to do is, I'll do this again. I was just testing it. So let me just come over here and remove that. Okay, so go to your VST Connect Pro, create VST Connect. So if you want to give them the number, once you're logged in, or just click here. Before we log in, I'm sorry. So click here to the right, type in your name, and then that'll give the number that you can pass on to someone running the VST Connect Performer software. Okay, question. Groove Agent is modeled after the MPC. Can it do threshold editing sampling like MPC hardware? So let's go ahead and take a quick look. So just load up an instance of Groove Agent here. And then all you have to do is come over here to the Recorder tab. And here you could have all of your different options for, your record folder, your record format, different sample rates, mono, stereo. And at this point, you could, you could choose to do chromatic. You could set, automatically go to next. You could set to start. You can set the start and end by threshold, and it will capture the MIDI note as well. So you could just kind of hit directly in here. So, Groove Agent's kind of unique in that it is a software drum machine that does sample. And how you would send an audio into it is just activate the sidechain, and then you could tell the sidechain source. So yeah, you can set up the threshold just like an MPC and have everything stored and edit it in the convenience of a computer format and paradigm. Okay, I have a question. I'm trying to use Reason Rack as a plugin in Cubase and have the MIDI out set up, and it's not recording any MIDI. It looks like it's recording, but seems to be an empty track. So I think, and I don't have a license of Reason Rack, but I think what you want to do is, you're not going to use, my impression, I could be wrong because I haven't run it, is that you would just load it as an instrument directly in here. So it works as a VST3 plugin. So you just say, I want to load up Reason. And then the MIDI data is not going to go into the sequencer of Reason, but the MIDI data is going to be resides in Cubase, and then Cubase sends that MIDI information out to Reason as it's functioning as a VST instrument. So, but I could be mistaken, but I believe that's how it's working now with the recent update. Okay. Okay, so it says, and when I hit stop, the track disappears. I follow tutorials and have everybody set up correct to my knowledge. Anyone have any ideas? I tried to contact support, but it's been a couple weeks. Still haven't heard anything back. All right, so I think, if you hit record and you're doing it in Cubase, check your, because generally if we have a MIDI track and there's no MIDI data, Cubase will kind of come over here and act like it's recording data. So say if I come here and I'm just recording that, and if it's not seeing any actual MIDI data when I stop, there's no MIDI data, so there's nothing to capture. So make sure that, you have your MIDI input set up here. And then, I think that should work for you. Question, can I anyhow use Cubase? Well, while using and listening to Discord, Skype, or Spotify. A lot of times it could depend on your audio interface drivers. So when you come, and it's a little different on Mac or PC, but when you go into your studio setup, here you select your audio interface, and then what you want to do is your VST audio system, you could select release driver when application is in background. All right, so Cubase can release a driver, but you often have to go into your, especially on Windows, it could be tricky, because you may have to go into your audio interface drivers in the control panel, and and it's different in every audio interface, and choose for it to release its audio driver to other applications as well. But you could definitely, once you have that configured, you could run YouTube and watch other stuff and be able to, have both audios going simultaneously. So, question, do I have to have an interface to use Cubase? If you want to listen to audio, you have to have something to play the audio back through, but you could use the built-in audio interface on your Mac, and just about every notebook or desktop or tablet PC will have an audio interface, so you could use that for monitoring. So you don't need one. It's obviously best to record, but there's a lot of people that will mix, using headphones and do editing directly from headphones on their directly connected to their computer. Very common for laptops. Okay. So I see questions. I work in 88.2. Okay, so we've had this question several times, so we don't have to repeat the questions again. Question, can I use my USB mic with just a USB to Lightning adapter to my iPad? Yeah, you can. So it depends on if the mic is class compliant. So, if it is set up to have an iOS driver, just because it's USB doesn't mean that it's going to immediately work with your iOS device. So just be aware of that. But as long as it does it, you should be able to run that, and you can do it in a DAW like Cubase. Okay. Okay, so it says, hello, everybody. I have one question, please. I'm on Cubase 10. Is there any way to hear only the effect in a send bus? For example, when I send vocal to a reverb and I want to hear only the reverb. All right, so I'll show you how to do that. And this will be using kind of the control room. So once you have, control room set up, let's go ahead here and I'll activate this project. So, and this will use something called the listen bus. It's kind of a little hidden secret gem. So let's go ahead and take a look, show you how to do this. Okay, so let's say I have just my... What did you say? You wished it all. So if I go to my effects end, and I solo the effect, it's going to solo the source feeding that as well. You were the party, the big event. So if I wanted to only hear the reverb, we would just click on, and again, we have to have this going through the control room. So go to your audio connections, select control room, and then make sure you have a monitor that's connected, and you can take your outputs, have a stereo output configured here, but don't have it routed anywhere. Now, once we do this, I could solo the reverb, but if I just click on the L button, so that's with the source. So that's solo is the source and the reverb. And click on the L. That's just the reverb return channel soloed by itself without the source. So click on the L button and you should be all set. Okay. Okay, question, any tips for 360-degree sound mixing? So if you're doing 5.1, you know, I've been doing 5.1 for 20-some years, and I love mixing in 5.1, just so you have a lot more, it's like a bigger palette to choose from. So to do this, we'd want to make sure that in our VST connections that we have this set we get to our audio connections rather, that we do have a 5.1 output. Okay, we don't have to have this connected anywhere. We could have a 5.1 output in our control room to match. We could now take this particular file and we want to route it out to the 5.1 output. Then as we double click, we could have our surround panner. So once a track is routed to the 5.1 output, we could have our surround panner, and we could, position things in full 5.1 mixing. We could also do ambisonics if that's, there's different perceptions of what 360 degrees is. But for 5.1, we could do this, some tips where I think some people get wrong is, having stuff constantly going from front to back, that gets annoying for the listener and not so enjoyable. When you add effects, you could have, with VST3 effects, you could have, as we go to add different effects, we could also add an effects channel track. And so as we do this, let's say we add our effects track. And then you could have your effects track be in 5.1 as well. So that way you could have kind of the same reverb kind of spread throughout, and VST3 plugins will scale depending on. So, try not to go too crazy, but it's nice to, I remember the first time I was exposed really to like a 5.1 setup was with Elliot Shiner's remix he did of Steely Dan Gaucho. And that was pretty stunning to listen to. Okay. So question, can I use Cubase with just my USB mic, no interface? Make sure that your USB mic has like a headphone output. So some of the earlier USB mics would, just had an out, but had in like a way to send audio to the computer, but no way to listen to it back. And it is very problematic. So as long as it has drivers, you should be all good to go. Okay. Okay, so I see biggest recitation or recession, maybe spelled wrong. In history in Cubase, still asking full price for Cubase. Actually, we did do a 40% off upgrade discount. We've given we did a Pad Shop library free. There's also the Stay Home Collections has done a Pad Shop 2 library. We've also done the Stay Home Collection, where I think it's still going on. It might end today, where you get Cubase elements, Dorico elements, Wavelab elements, and the Absolute Collection for 60 days for free. So, there's a lot of things going on and different offers and options. So, okay. Okay, so let's see. So we have a question. So working. Okay, so people again just repeating the same questions that we've covered already. So Okay. Just reading through different comments. Okay, just again reading through. All right, so it's great that other people in the comments field are helping out people with questions. So I see how can you use MPC 2.8 in this DAW? I think as long as if it's, I think that's a hardware MPC. All you'd have to do is just connect it as an audio. I'm not sure if it's an audio interface or just a sampling workstation. But you could definitely, if it works through like a plug-in interface, you could do that, or just connect it directly as MIDI right in. So I see, is there a way to have auto punch in and out? Sorry, my timeline just jumped way ahead. Sorry. Let me just scroll back in time. Bear with me just a second. Okay, just try to find where I was. Just bear with me. Sorry about this. Okay, is there a way to have auto punch in and out send MIDI commands to external devices? I don't think it's going to send MIDI commands. I'm not sure what external devices that you want. Is it like a record enable light or record light? So I know some of them will respond to different MIDI messages depending on what it's doing. So if you let me know what external MIDI device or what external devices you want it to be done. I know some devices, I know some people in Ondo use GPIO to send for a record light. So I'm not sure if that's what you want to do, but I know that there's some that just respond to MIDI messages and will sync to the transport as well. Okay, let's go on. Okay, does anybody know how I can use Cubase on my iPad without an interface, just using the USB mic and adapter? As long as the USB mic has, works with your iOS, that should work great. So there shouldn't be any problem connecting it. So I use a Rode mic with my iPad frequently without any problems. Just having the, camera connection kit, I think, the USB adapter. Okay. Okay, so I see question, how do you do screen capture while recording audio? Um, when I do like tutorials, often I'm just using ScreenFlow on Mac, and that just captures the screen. I think you could do it through OBS as well. So the screen capture doesn't really affect the audio recording so much. So, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding your question. Okay. Okay, seeing more discussion on the reason, getting that to work. Okay. Okay, so it says, I'm having trouble importing .mid files from Logic Pro, from Logic. Cubase Pro 10 will create Hallian instrument, but no MIDI. So go to your preferences, to MIDI file. And then what we want to do is you'll see destination. You could just choose MIDI tracks. By default, it will go to Hallian Sonic SE multi-timbral, but just choose MIDI tracks. And then as you import MIDI files, it'll just go directly to MIDI tracks for you without being assigned. Okay. Okay, so how can Dorico interact with Nuendo and Cubase? My nephew is huge into scoring, and I'm considering ordering it for him to collaborate as I have the equipment on East Coast, yet he's West Coast. So if you want to work with it, it's sharing the same audio engine and the same video engine. Now, to get files back and forth, you can import and export standard MIDI files. But if he's done a lot of different articulations and scoring layouts, you could also, import and export music XML files, and all the, different score symbols, all that will be carried over directly into Cubase as well. So you could just use music XML or standard MIDI files to get your data back and forth. So I see a question, is Cubase free? There is a 60-day stay home trial, I think, which ends today. But, if you get different audio interfaces, you can get a light version of Cubase, either Cubase LE or with Yamaha or Steinberg branded hardware. You get Cubase or Cubase AI. But it's generally not free. It would have to be licensed through like a hardware purchase, or you could purchase the program. Okay, just going. Okay, so just going through. I know we had some questions that were sent in that we'll go ahead and get to here in just a minute. Try to get to, see if there's. Okay, so it says, I have a MIDI that I imported from a different session. Is there a way to make MIDI on those tracks play half the time they're at in Ableton? I could double time or cut time in half on a MIDI note. So I think it's just a logical editor preset. So if we go to your logical editor presets, there's... Yeah, so if you could just select all the MIDI, and then you could just say half tempo or double tempo as logical editor presets. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the questions that were mailed in. Sorry that we're running late. We'll try to keep going for a little bit. Okay. Says, I was watching your Hangout and you were talking about using a single instance of a VST. Okay, no, we'll answer that. Okay. So question, always when I record modular or external synths, drum machines is never 100% in time. How can I solve this? My Cubase version is 10.5. Cubase is always the master. My project synchronization setup is set right. I hope you can help me out. So it could really depend on, there's a lot of different factors for your MIDI interface, but when you compare any external MIDI to a VST instrument, there's going to be a big difference in timing. So all the VST instruments are sample accurate. And when using a lot of external MIDI, their timing floats around quite a bit. So if you take any external MIDI, it's never going to be as tight. If you have, it could be, different MIDI interfaces. I still have two MIDX8 USB interfaces. So I have 16 MIDI in and 16 MIDI out, and I don't have any timing problems with that. But realize that anytime you go out into the external world that, there could be latencies, especially if you're doing analog synthesizers. They could tend to drift quite a bit timing-wise and be not as tight. So, but if you could let us know like what MIDI interfaces that you're using, that would be helpful as well. Okay. So we had a question that someone had sent in about how they couldn't see the musical mode on their particular audio file. So let's say if we come here and they had an audio file in the project, and in the pool it was set to musical mode, and it was set to musical mode here, but they didn't see the indication here. I think so when they do this, they didn't see the indication. So I think what happened is that this became a part. So I will say events to part. And if you have an audio file where you don't see any of the different icons here in the upper right-hand corner, such as it being in musical mode or being a shared copy, what we could do is just select the file, go to your audio menu, and choose dissolve part. And then once we have that part dissolved here, I think that those icons and the musical warping abilities will come back and be visible. Okay. Okay, just reading through. Okay. So we had a bit of discussion last time from Mark on the last Hangout. He says he was using a reverse macro a lot, and it works a treat. But when restarting Cubase, the macro entry process plugin Valhalla Vintage Verb _ X64 is missing every single time. So I kind of did this macro, and he sent the macro, which is very nice of Mark to do. So I will just go ahead and take a look at it. And what he wanted to do was basically to process like a reverse reverb. And I took what he had done and I kind of just did it as I did two macros and made a macro of what he was doing. So I'll show what I did here. So if we had like a drum part, so I'll just take like a loop and let me just turn this up a little bit so we can hear it. So he had created a macro like this, and I don't have the Valhalla reverb plugin, but we'll take a look at his macro. So when we went to process reverse reverb, this was kind of the macro that he made. And then I had broken it down to have a separate plugin here that just processed the revelation as a separate macro. So I kind of did a two-stage macro. So now when I wanted to just run this, let me just select, and I selected the track. I had the track selected and selected all the events. And then when I go to macros, let's see if I do this right. Let me just check my macro here, see if maybe I didn't save it. Okay, so I'm going to make a new macro here. Just making sure I didn't. Okay, so I'll just do new macro. So I did, this is my macro here, these steps. And then I also just did the process reverb separately. So now I'll come over here and let's do the process reverse reverb, and I'll add that command. And then I'll add a second macro within the macro. So now when I listen to this, we see our snare. So I will just double click that. And what I want to do is just go to my edit menu. And if I did this right, so at this point, I'll just take off the cycle, and then so let's just run the second macro for the process reverb, but I'll do that for all of the files. So let's see if I could do this one more time. And I may have messed up my macro by changing some of the preferences, but if we come over here, that now you can see that, and I will just let me just unmute all these. But now it's processed that reverb. So try combining those two macros. So the one that you created, I just kind of broke out into two different ones. So I did a process reverb as a separate one, and that seems to, I don't have the Valhalla plugin, but that seems to still access the reverb plugin. So you give that a try and see if that helps you out. Okay. We have a question. So it says, could you please suggest this to be affixed to Steinberg when using colors anywhere in the Cubase mix console project windows? Say I want to know what color I'm using for a pull down for a channel that I have a color assigned to it. Well, when you could click on a channel or select a pull down arrow, the color choice, it does not tell you which the colors in the list you completely have chosen for that channel, or at least for me it doesn't. It should have a simple check when identifying your chosen color, seeing the pick. So what this person had done is they had a series of colors that they created. So we just went to Alt-Shift-S, and they had labeled their colors. So let's say they wanted to call this vocal, bass, drums or whatever. And when they want to go to select the colors, they wanted to see it by the name. So if we come over here to the mix console, and they wanted to select between multiple shades of a particular color, they do that. So this can be done by just going to Alt plus Shift S, and then if you go to Options, you'll see this little checkbox for Select Colors by Name. So we hit Apply, And now as we go to select your different colors, you could see the names that you've given. So if I come over here, I want to change the color in this particular track, we can now see the name of the colors. So once again, go to your color setup. And I think if you just go to your project menu to project color setup, at that point, you could just label those, but in the options, just place the check mark just like you want it. So we'll pretend that we read your mind and provided a solution for you. So do that, and I think that'll fix and do exactly what you want. Question: what's the standard trick to making a mono guitar appear stereo and wide when mixing? What was a common way done in the 80s, like with Eddie Van Halen's guitar parts? Because a lot of those songs had only one guitar track going, but you can hear it in the mix. It echoes to the other channel, to the other side of the stereo spectrum to fill it out, especially since Michael Anthony's bass lines were simple playing. All right, so let's say if I have a guitar part here, we'll listen to this. So let's say we just... So if I wanted to take this, I'll go to my edit channel settings, and when I open this up, I'm going to have a reverb that's panned here. So I have a stereo reverb. So if we listen to just a guitar part. So now I could add my stereo reverb. So let me just put this always on top. Okay, so we could have... we add our reverb, and what we want to do is you'll see a little drop down menu here. Make sure that link panners is unchecked. And when we go to panning, what we could do now is we could pan the guitar all the way to the left. And then what I want to do is to pan the reverb in the opposite channel. So when I come here, so that way the reverb is only on the right channel and the guitar, the dry guitar, is on the left. Now I think you may have sent this in earlier and you mentioned that you're listening to it on like a Bose surround system that's kind of taking a stereo file and mapping it to surround you with surround speakers. And, that's not an accurate way to kind of judge if this function is working, because that's just kind of, making up extra information for the channel. So, but listen to it with headphones, and I think you'll see that works for you. But one thing to check is just to make sure by default that this little drop down menu, that link panners, isn't checked, because if that's checked, then these will just kind of be stuck to always be associated with each other. But when unchecked, you could have independent panning of your source from your different material. Okay. So I'm currently working on a template using multiple Contact 6 players. I have already set up audio outputs to 16 as a default with associated MIDI channels, but is there an option in the mixer view to hide or mixer channels or fold them away to make navigating much easier? Only this template will have quite a few MIDI channels and associated contact players eventually. How do people generally handle large amount of mixer channels when creating templates? So if we have a large session, we could come over here. Let's say I will go to the bottom and let's add a number of tracks. So let's just say... so let's say we have, a number of different tracks. I'll just build kind of a large template here. Okay, so, and kind of navigating in your mixer view is sometimes, tricky, but once we're in the mixer, there's some different viewing options. So we could go to different configurations. One is you could add different mixer views here. So you could actually say, show only channels that have data. So if you have like a huge template and you don't have stuff in there, so once you kind of click here to the right, you have these different options. Or you could say, show tracks that are only playing at the cursor channels, or show only selected channels. So if I'm here, I could, let's just say I'm in my mixer view. I only wanted to, I have these channels selected. I could, and again, these are just recallable by keyboard shortcuts. I could say show only selected channels, and it will hide everything else. And you could have different presets for these as well. So you can say, this is my strings, this is my, brass, this is my synth sounds. So, use these different visibility agents. And then, set up your keyboard shortcuts, and that will allow you to navigate with and see exactly what you want to within your mixer. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a possibility to crop or bounce the sampler start and to create a new sample without the extra wave information outside of the start end markers? This would make zooming and handling much easier, if not possible right now. Could it be implemented in a future update? So if I wanted to, let's say if I have just a part of a guitar part, so let's say if I'm here and I wanted to just listen to, and I just wanted one chord here. So let's say I want this chord. I'll turn my snap off. So, and if I wanted to drag this to a sampler track, we do this, and I see that it's going to take kind of the whole file. But if I just select a portion here, and you asked if there's a way to bounce it, just get your audio menu and choose to bounce selection. So just kind of come here, replace the events, drag that in, and then you don't have to worry about the unnecessary tails at the beginning or end of the file. So just, you could select a region, do a bounce selection, and then drag that right into the sampler. Okay. So see, question, is it possible to append insert effects presets to existing tracks where there already are some effects inserted? Example, I have an effects inserted, but on top of that, I would like to add previously saved insert effect strips. Forget the right name, probably channel presets, and then add to the existing line of plugins. Of course, I understand the workarounds, but they kind of always slow me down. So let's take a look to see if we could do this. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that, but let's say if we have different inserts going on here. So let's just, I'll select a number of channels here. And I'll just add a different insert effects to all of these while in Quick Link. Okay, so if I wanted to, let's come over here to some of our presets. So our effects chain presets, I think so it looks like if I just have a particular track open, so I have all these inserts, and if I drag it over here, it'll replace all of them. But let me just undo that, like Alt-Z. But here, I'll just come back, we'll undo that. But if I drag this to the one below, let me just see if that, Yeah, it looks like it replaces them. So I'll see if I can come up with, see if there's a way to do that. I know you can probably drag, if you have these effects in. Let's see if we select these effects, if we could drag multiple. I think it's one at a time. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a way of doing that. Okay. So question, in a browser, when you click on a VST instrument, text or list view, if you click again, you could start searching for the patches, etc. This makes sense for Steinberg products, but not for third-party products, as there usually aren't any, and that slows you down every time you click on it accidentally. So I think what this is about, if I'm understanding, like if we go to our VST instruments or effects, I'll go home here. So if I wanted to go to my VST instruments and look for, let's say if I want to come over here to Pad Shop, I could double click. I could go to like my Stay Home collection, which is a wonderful collection. And then I could see all my presets and navigate there. And he's wondering why, it doesn't work for third-party plugins. It does work for third-party plugins. They just have to implement it that way. So a lot of times the third-party plugins will have kind of a generic host-free way of navigating presets so that the experience is consistent between different DAWs. But it's not a limitation that Steinberg is imposing. So you should contact your plugin manufacturer to have them do that. Okay, so our question says volume fades. Can we get a way to change both fade time and curve shape without the submenu? Regular drag is fade time. Shift drag changes the curve, like in some other DAWs. It depends if you're doing automation or if you're working directly with. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look here. If we're doing automation on particular events, or if you're doing the fade handle. So if we have, the fade handle here, we could just adjust that. And if you wanted to change like the default fade handle, we could say, I want that as my fade handle. You could click on apply length and set as default. And now every time that you would do a fade, so let's say if I split, we could do this here. So, the fade handles could kind of be unique, but if you're doing like an automation point, or you can say, okay, I just want to take this, and let's say if I'm doing a fade out from there, here you could just kind of switch your tool and be able to change that. So, it could depend on whether you're doing clip gain or automation. So, okay, so let's move back to our feed. We'll go through a couple more questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. If you've learned a tip or a trick, feel free to go ahead and give a thumbs up. So I'm seeing, is it possible to select multiple real copies of MIDI events and turn them into shared copies? I don't think so. I was trying to do this the other day for something, but I think if I wanted to do this, so those are real copies, and let me just see if I can. It looks like maybe, let's see if I change this here. We just try that again. And so we have a real copy. those are real copies. And let's say if I want to do the repeat, so I'm doing repeat events. Okay, so if you may have to add more to it, but it looks like if we have, let me just undo this. And I had real events here. I could hit Command K or Control K and say we want to do shared copies of that. So let's say I want to do 6. And now the original ones will turn into, it's a bit of a goofy workaround, but you might be able to have that work. So now that these will all be shared copies. So try to select one and then let me see if those are. Let's see if this is. Yeah, so now those are all kind of shared. So not a real easy way, but I'll see if I could come up with something. Okay. Okay, so I'm just seeing comments about people wanting a multi-warp. It's been kind of communicated with Steinberg a lot, so so we understand that you want it. Okay. Okay, go through a couple more questions. Okay, just reading through different comments. Thanks for everyone's wonderful questions. We'll try to wrap up here in a couple minutes. I know we've gone a long time. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. Can you please give us some tips on when creating EDM dance music, how to set up side chaining for the bass drum and bass guitar or keyboards or keypads? Yeah, so let's take a quick look at that. It's pretty easy to do, and this is kind of a big change in Cubase 10. So let me just jump back over here. Okay, so if we want to set up side chaining, let's say I have a scenario. Kind of like this, where I'm going to have kick and let's say like a synth bass, and I wanted to side chain. Let me just take this. Sorry about that. So if I wanted the synth bass to be sidechained, I would just come over here. Let's put a compressor on. And so one of the stock compressors, I will just come right over here. We'll activate the side chaining. And then I click on the icon just to the right of that. And now I wanted to tell the source. So I select the source there. And now when we hit play, it'll just do the side chaining for you automatically. And if you wanted to add multiple sources, you could do that as well. So, so very kind of easy to work with. So you could add other tracks as sidechain input sources. All right. So let's move on. Okay, so question, how do you effectively use that very audio? So let's go ahead and switch to a different project here with some vocals in it. Or I can show you here real quick. So once you have, your very audio, you can just double click on a vocal file, and I'll take you into the sample editor, and I'll just go full screen for very audio. And then I'll just go to my very audio tab. It'll do its analysis. And now at this point, you could have two different tool modes. So we could say, I like to show all the smart controls. And now we could basically edit your audio much like a MIDI sequencer. So if I wanted to select all these notes, I could just navigate them and move them and snap them to pitch like so. If I wanted to go to the top, I could get rid of vibrato. We could also create, different anchor points. So I could say, let's just, the singer drifted flat there. We could go to the bottom and either it'll turn into like a smart tool where I could do scissors. So if I wanted to cut to create a new segment, or at the end of segments, I could glue them together. You could also do, different anchor points. You could say, I don't want to, like at this point, I'll take this and I wanted to tame the vibrato in the center without affecting those end points. We could choose those points that we wanted to work with. You could also kind of just tilt pitch from different anchor points as well. So really phenomenal editing tool, and again with unlimited levels of undo as well. All right, let's see if we get one more question in. Okay. Then we'll go ahead and wrap up. We've been going a long time. Let's see. Okay, just see there's one last minute question. Okay, it says I have a new audio interface. When I open up an old project, I have to change the ins and outs as well as MIDI. Is there a way to automatically do this? The project is going to have settings for your audio inputs and outputs for routing purposes. So once you open up the project, save the settings and just do a save project, and then you should be all set. So, okay, I see a question. Does Steinberg product can convert scanned music sheet to MIDI file? There was a number of programs that were doing that maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, and they all kind of shied away because it wasn't incredibly accurate. So, and often it was faster by time you looked for all the problems and errors that were imposed by the scanning process, that it would, be quicker just to kind of enter it in from scratch. There are some scanning utilities that will allow you to scan a piece of music and export it as a music XML. And if you have one of those, you could just go to your import menu and import a music XML, but Steinberg currently doesn't do that. And I think a lot of the big notation programs have kind of almost, started to really shy away. And I know some have stopped supporting and distributing some of products that were offering that or attempting to offer that functionality. Okay. Okay, see, there's one last quick question. Then we'll wrap up. Okay, so I see a question. Recently, key editors note is not snap with grid when adjusting the note size. I reinstall, but still the same. So if you have a situation like that with the key editor, it could just be that snap is disabled. So let's say if I have a note drawn in there, and as I would just make sure that you have the J key. So you'll have hit the J key on your computer keyboard for snap. And that will probably just, so now I could say we want to snap to, the grid, and that will automatically only place it like on the beat or on the measure. So okay. So with that, I think we've gone almost 3 hours and 50 minutes or so, or just a little under. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'm going to have to go help do something with my son. He's been very patient. I want to thank everyone for all of the wonderful questions today. If you want to send questions in advance, you can please feel free to send them to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. And it's helpful if you include like an email address. Sometimes I could just do a quick response to help you out. So if you just put your email address in the body, that would be helpful. If for some reason it gets lost in the email forward to me. Take advantage. I think you can still do the Stay Home collection today if you haven't done it yet. And that's 60 days for Dorico elements, wavelab elements, Cubase elements, and the Absolute 4 VST collection, which is a monster instrument. So if you get a chance to do that, that'd be a good time. I think you can still do it today. And make sure that you check out some of the free stuff. There's a Synergy Pad Shop library. Check out Gary Gibbons of Online Music Foundry. He's done a wonderful library of free sounds for Pad Shop 2. You could check that out and keep up to date with all the different Steinberg offers that'll be going on. There's more constantly coming. Make sure that if you learned a tip or trick that you subscribe to the channel and actually give a thumbs up to the video. That allows us to do more of these things, and we want to make sure that people are learning more about Cubase. So we want to make sure that you're getting most out of it as a lot of people are home. And again, I want to thank everyone for great questions. And we'll be doing these hangouts while people are staying home. We're trying to do them twice a week. So look for the next hangout on next Tuesday at the same time, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. The hangout should hopefully be indexed later tonight, and we'll try to get that done so you could quickly navigate. So thank you very much. I hope everyone's learned something, and have a great weekend, and please stay safe and healthy. Thank you.